to another episode of the Writer's Hive. As always, I have with me Amber and Julie. And the Writer's Hive is a bi-weekly show where we demystify the writing and publishing process in the hopes of creating a writer's hive mind. This episode is all about self-editing. This week's topic comes from one of our commenters, and as always, we encourage you to comment down below so that we are able to continue any conversation about any of our topics. And this is from Sherry. So Sherry asks, learning to self-edit is a big one for me right now. My work in progress isn't ready for beta readers yet, but I know it needs developmental work. Not sure where to start and what to look for. So Amber, would you like to kick us off in terms of how you self-edit?
Sure. It's changed over the years. Originally, I was just a hardcore pantser, and so I didn't do any self-edits until after the first draft was completely finished. It was just a big brain dump, and then I would try to edit it, and it didn't work out well a lot. Now I think that I try to kind of edit as I go, and then once I finish the first draft, it would be hard for me not to jump right into self-edits from there. I know you should give it some time to marinate, and I'm actually currently working on a draft that I did write over a year ago, and now going in and editing, and I can see how it helps to let it sit for a while because I'm looking at it with fresh eyes. But when you're in that world, it's hard to not immediately self-edit, at least a little.
For me, self-editing has been entirely mandatory. And so what I usually do is at the end of a first draft, I'll set it aside. I'm lucky that right now I'm kind of on a good cycle where I have things that I've written a year ago that now I'm editing for either publication or for querying. So I have a nice cycle of drafting, editing, so that I don't have to look at something too soon. But self-editing for me is a huge part of my writing process. I definitely want to be able to send my book to beta readers, critique partners, but I do not want them to get my first draft. It's not fun for anybody to have to read. So I do have to do that. And I know it can be overwhelming to get into it and wonder where you start. So what I typically do is take it in stages. So after I've sat away from my book for a little bit, I'll go through as a reader and from start to finish, just read it through as if I was reading my book for the first time. And I'll usually either have a notebook next to me or maybe my phone with like a voice recorder, and I'll just take notes. Chapter 1, if I see a plot hole or an issue, or I know for sure something needs to be done, I just make big, picture edits, or notes. And then I'll go through and I will fix those things. So if I realize that a character's hair changed or a name changed or something like that, I'll go through and do all of those larger edits or iron out some of the world building and plot consistency or pacing issues that I saw in my notes. And then I usually go through a deeper edit that's more of a grammar edit. And I usually stop somewhere in between like grammar and line edits. I like it to be as clean and pretty as possible, but I try not to get too hooked in on the like minutia of every sentence at that level. And I also try not to over edit myself. There's a lot of times where I think something doesn't work, but a beta reader or critique partner will. So I try to keep it really broad at that stage and then pose those questions to my critique partners or my beta readers when I have them and just say, do you think this line works? Here was another option I was thinking about, but I hate to do that too early on because I can question myself into circles and edit myself into circles. But I definitely sit away from it for a little bit, read it through like a reader, take broad notes, go through, do those broad fixes, and then do some grammar edits and things like that. And then I will usually send it out to a trusted critique partner or multiple. Right now, I only have, a few critique partners in my writing circle, and I will send it to a critique partner usually prior to beta readers, and then I'll implement their feedback, send it to beta readers, and then either query or at this point, I don't have an agent. So I think my process might change if I had an agent, because then I obviously don't have to do as much self-editing or worry about critique partners and beta readers at that stage. But right now in my writing, that's kind of my process.
I love that. So I have a similar process to Julie's. And in terms of after I finish a draft, I also have it marinate for a little bit. I used to be under the impression that I had to do that for a long time. But as I published throughout the years, usually my timelines are pretty quick. And I sometimes wasn't able to let it sit for more than a week at a time. So I've sort of fallen into that mindset where I do give it about a week before I jump right back in. And at that point, I will read it on my phone, like on an e-reader or my Kindle, because I find the process of just reading the book fully through as quickly as I can without taking too many notes really helps me get back into the story and find those little changes. I will highlight things that need to be fixed and then do really quick notes, but that's why I try to do it on a device that like I can't necessarily write on. And then after that, I will do my own sort of developmental edit based on what I found during that time that I was reading. I'll go through from top to bottom and do my own type of edit. And mostly it's big picture, plot issues, character issues. And then I will pretty it up as much as I can. I usually at this point don't do grammar checks or anything. I'll do little fixes and then I'll bring it. Lately, I've been loving to bring it to my iPad because I'm able to actually write on the document and I really dive in deep in that second round of revisions where I'll fix as much as I can before I give it to anyone else. I'm like Julie that I don't like people reading any of my early drafts. It's super embarrassing for me to have people read my stuff when it's not as perfect as I think I can make it. And then at that point, I would give it to critique partners. Personally, I don't do beta readers until the book is pretty much done for me to get that real reader feedback. There is always the opportunity, which I do worry about, that there's like some glaring issue. But if I've done my process with critique partners and my own self edits, I usually don't get a lot of issues that come out of that. And I'm able to really get that reader feedback. My thing about beta readers is that I usually choose like avid readers. So the amount of feedback or the type of feedback that I'm looking for in the earlier stages doesn't really work for me because as they're usually not writers, I don't get fixes and ideas on how to fix. So I usually just look to beta readers for that end of the road reader feedback. If something is working or isn't working, or I can bring out the emotion that I want, then that's fantastic. So that's my process.
So one tip that I've learned for somebody that isn't super used to, you guys have self-edited a lot more than I have. But one tip that I tried and it didn't work as well, but then kind of transformed into something that I think does now work really well for me is I get lost in timelines a lot in my draft. And so for me, the first part of self-editing is making sure I nail down the timeline, the exact order I think everything should happen. And a lot of times, like when scenes come to my head, maybe I'll write it and then it's like, no, that really should be later in the book. Well, before I tried to do the whole like sticky note or like cork board and put everything, and it was too much and it really messed me up. But then I joined One Stop for Writers and they have a timeline where you can write your little piece about the scene and then you can put it in. And if it needs to go somewhere, you literally just like drag it and put it in place. And then when you're done, you can export that to a PDF and it will like list it like scene by scene for you. And it's helped me with this new draft that I'm working on so much and nailing down my timeline. So if you are new to self-editing, maybe read through like Kate and Julie both said. I do that on my iPad and make notes about what scenes you like, what scenes you don't, about your timeline, and then just put all those notes in One Stop or on a corkboard or just something that you can visually see it, because once you visually see it, it's, I think, a lot easier to know where you need to edit.
And One Stop for Writers, if you don't know, was created by the people who did the Emotion Thesaurus, Becca Puglisi and Angela Ackerman. It's a fantastic resource. All of the emotional thesauri are on there, in addition to some extra ones that have not been published yet. So it's an excellent resource that I would highly recommend. And obviously, well, I'm not going to speak for you, but Julie and Amber seem to recommend. So,
and one other tool that I actually got from Kate, and I'm surprised she didn't mention it, was listening to your book be read aloud, which catches a lot of issues. So you can do that right in Word. There's a function there where it reads aloud to you. It is mildly terrifying, but if you find the right voice, it's okay. And I was able to go through that and catch a lot of typos where the wrong word was used, but it wasn't catching it in the draft because it was still a word. Or I could spot a lot of repetitive words because I was noticing that I was hearing the same thing over and over again. So it really does help to have it read aloud as well. So if there's a read aloud function on any device that you're using, I would say definitely try to do a read aloud. That definitely helps with edits. Once you get to the later stages, I wouldn't necessarily do it right at the beginning, but towards the later stages of your self edits, the read aloud helps as well.
Yeah, that's my last line of defense before I go into my grammar checks right before critique partners. So yeah, thank you for reminding me about that. It's all rote to me, so I don't ever think about it half the time.
It was a good one. It was a good trick. Yeah. And I was like, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it read back to me. It sounds terrifying, but it was so helpful. It was a lot of help.
Yeah, probably especially as a audiobook listener, it puts you in a different mindset, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because sometimes, after reading the book so many times, like we naturally skip things. We skip over words. Another tip that I heard somewhere that I don't actually do, but I thought it was interesting, is that they read the book out of order. This is more of like a line edit stage. So they'll read it out of order. So it they're not falling into the story as you normally would if you read it top to bottom. And they're really able to hone in on the grammar and the style and things like that. So I found that to be a helpful trick, which may be helpful to you.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never thought about that. So looking at the specifics of her question, right? She wants to know that it needs developmental work and just where to start. So if you had to give one piece of advice, first step.
Read through and make notes. First step.
Yeah. In terms of developmental edits, because it's really having to do with those big picture things, I think giving it a break, whether that's 3 days or 3 months, you'll be able to look at the book a little differently. And in terms of developmental, those big picture issues, you get that from a read through. Whether you do it, you could do the read aloud feature right away, or, put it on a different, I do recommend having it on a different platform than you wrote it on. That's my own personal thing. And I just think that, or even a different font, just to change it up a little bit for your eyes. So you're not falling into that drafting mode, where you just are unable to see a lot of things on the surface.
Yeah. And really fight the urge during that read through to stop and start fixing things, which is why I wouldn't recommend doing it on your computer if you have any other option, because you will want to stop and fix things right away. So doing it somewhere where you can just read is definitely helpful.
Yeah, note taking is still helpful. I try not to do that, but I know you two do that, and it's however you feel comfortable. But just not being able to actually change the words while you're reading it is important, and I think it could be helpful.
Yeah, and you can always go old school and go up to, I don't think Kinko's still exists, but someplace like that where Staples, exactly, and just print it and get, a good old red pen and start making notes on the side as you go. You can't edit, you can't change anything because it's on paper. So if you don't have a Kindle, or you don't have a Nook, or you don't have an iPad, just go old school and print it. It's not cheap, exactly, but it is helpful to see it different. It really is.
And it might be a little fun memento to have too, later down the line when you have all of your notes. I always love reading authors that annotate their own stuff. So that's always fun.
Yeah. I still have the first iteration of the book that I'm publishing right now with all of Amber's notes in it. It's not the same book, but it is fun to have.
Our question for this episode to you is, how do you self-edit? And also, if you would like us to dive a little deeper in another episode about different types of self-editing, such as character voice or line editing, things like that, do let us know in the comments as well. And we look forward to chatting with you there. All of our links are in the description box below, so please give us a follow on our social platforms. We'll see you later. And we had a comment from one of our lovely.
Hold on, I don't know why, but it looks like I have a mustache.
Do you want to just mute, Amber?
Sorry, we can still hear Chase a lot.